This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Om Hari Om Namaha. This month's presentation should help us to make further inroads into the basic philosophy and principles of Vaiṣṇavism. Soon we shall present the key question. Last month, we conclusively showed that 11 pretenders, the zonal acharyas of 1978, were all bogus gurus. They were imitators. They desired to be worshipped as liberated acharyas before they deserved to become gurus even at the preliminary stage. The power they possessed at that time allowed them to pull off the scam for just short of a decade, but then the whole show bottle came crashing down. That history requires to be exposed in order to check so-called ISKCON at this time. However, as specifically referred to last month, all the facts of its sordid history are now being presented in a more organized format, described in stages with unbreakable logic. Such reason overcomes the bad logic underpinning the pseudo-devotional conglomerate, which is nothing more than another organized religion, albeit much more dangerous. Now, this month's first division pivots upon a key question, and this question must be answered rightly. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, text 4, material nature is described as Ksharobhavaha, endlessly mutable. Wrong answers to this key question, since they are all products of the Maya, are endlessly mutable. The right answer is clear, concise, and easily and quickly assimilated. Now, the second division of this month's presentation entails a discussion of certain contagion implicit in the wrong answers and the consequences of that contagion. This division will analogically be explained via basic algebraic principle. More importantly, it will also be explained in terms of cause and effect. The third division of this month's presentation will put the correct answer to the key question in its true perspective, as opposed to short-term or intermediate perspectives, all of which are nothing more than illusory realities of the moment. Only via the long-term perspective can you remain unfazed by all the rationalizations pushed by the followers, disciples, and vested interests of the ISKCON World Church. Now, as you may remember from last month, we brought out a statement from His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, concerning the mantra given by the bogus guru. Prabhupada's statement from a platform lecture in Surat, India, was a rhetorical question. Once again, here's that excerpt. Quote, "First of all thing is, if the spiritual master is not bona fide, how his mantra can be bona fide? Your statement is contradictory. If you say the spiritual master is not bona fide, then how his mantra becomes bona fide," unquote. Now, this statement is obviously rhetorical because the question practically answers itself. However, we must then ask, in the same vein, what about the bogus guru's initiations? This directly leads to the key question, which is, can a bogus guru give a bona fide initiation? If the mantra a bogus guru gives is useless, then how can his initiation have any spiritual or devotional value? In answering this question, this key question, let us apply it to the ISKCON World Church and all of its initiations since the last week of December 1977. Were any of these bona fide? Dished out by that confederation? Are any of today's initiations bona fide? The 11 great pretenders were not empowered to initiate anyone into Krishna consciousness, pure Krishna consciousness, in the late 70s or 80s. A real initiation, received from a qualified representative of a bona fide bhakti organization, that initiation is known as the Bhakti Lata Bija. Bija, the Sanskrit word bija, translates to mean the seed of pure devotion. The devotional creeper that culminates to fruition when it breaks through the material coverings and reaches the spiritual planets. This rare development of complete perfection has many outstanding facets connected to it, but exploring any of those here would be tangential. As such, we shall remain focused on our chief question and its answer. If the bogus guru does not and cannot give a bona fide initiation, then what does he give to his initiated disciple? In place of the Bhakti Lata Bija, what does the disciple get from the institutional guru? Within so-called ISKCON, in most cases, he gets two bijas. The misguided and unfortunate disciple who has taken initiation from a bogus Vaishnava guru in that cult receives from the pretender guru the bij that guru has actuated in his pretension, which represents and animates him. In other words, every bogus guru, including the party man and the rent acharyas, functioning in so-called ISKCON, they're all internally actuated by their own particular tastes, individual tastes. Now, the second bij received, in most cases, but not in all, is the ISKCON bij itself. This is the institutional seed or plan meant for recognition and advancement in the deviated cult. If the guru, however, was a wild card and superficially only had a connection to the institution, then the ISKCON bij is not received by his disciple. Such was the case with at least one of the original 11 pretenders. When the ISKCON bij is received, however, the disciple imitates his institutional guru, his rent acharya. He does so by climbing the lattice work of the bureaucracy in order to secure GBC imprimatur for becoming important in the cult. In the meantime, he becomes a party man who buys into whatever groupthink is in the ascendant within that cult's echo chamber. Currently, that would be simpatico with the third transformation, the Hinduization of so-called ISKCON, although there are signs that this third transformation is nearing its fag end. The importance and progression of initiation was concisely described by Srila Prabhupada in the following excerpt from a letter to his most prominent female disciple dated September 4th, 1972, quote, "Second initiation is real initiation. First initiation is the preliminary, just to make him prepared, just like primary and secondary education. The first initiation gives him chance to become purified. And when he is actually purified, then he is recognized as a Brahmin, and that means real initiation. The eternal bond between disciple and spiritual master begins from the first day he hears, unquote. To be initiated means to be recognized as having moved closer to the realization of the bona fide spiritual master. The process begins when the prospective disciple first hears the message from the advanced devotee, who may or may not eventually become his Diksha Guru. That stage is called Shraddha, or faith. It is the soft faith of the neophyte. The real Guru is, at minimum, a qualified Brahmin. He no longer possesses soft faith. The qualified Brahmin possesses firm faith, and this is special. As per his intention, Prabhupada wanted to create a society of Brahmins fixed up in Krishna consciousness. Did it ultimately play out like that? This question may be justly raised. The Brahmin must first be initiated by a spiritual master. This certainly includes first initiation, the Harinama initiation, wherein the Diksha Guru links his disciple to the holy name. The holy name had already been chanted by the disciple, but the actual link to the Guru Parampara, the connection to the holy name, takes place at first initiation. Can a Sahajiya accomplish this for his follower? Can he provide this linkage? Of course not. The Sahajiya instead links his follower to the Sahajiya Sampradaya that he represents. Now, when the sincere disciple has served his Guru for an adequate length of time and has passed the inevitable tests arranged for him by both his spiritual master and Chaitya Guru, he then becomes qualified to receive second initiation. It can only be received from a bona fide Diksha Guru. Now, some opine that upon receiving this initiation, the disciple automatically becomes a Madhyamadikari. That may have been the case during Vedic times, but such is not the case in modern or postmodern Malechaland. Prabhupada granted both second and sannyasa initiation in order to assist his disciples in becoming fixed on the Brahminical platform. In that sense, his initiations can be considered encouragements, but they were also gateways. The disciple had to pass through those gates and become qualified after receiving the Gayatri Mantra or the Sunyas Mantra. Prabhupada, during the period of his physical manifestation, was the Vartma Pradarshaka Guru, Shiksha Guru, Diksha Guru, and Sannyas Guru for everyone. Brahminical initiation by the spiritual master is called Upanayanam. Upa means near, and Nayana means bringing. When the spiritual master brings the disciple nearer by giving him Gayatri Mantra, second initiation, that is called Upanayanam. When this stage is initially perfected, the disciple is fixed in Krishna consciousness. This is the status of the qualified Brahmin as stated specifically in the following excerpt from a letter to a temple president dated August 20th, 1976. Quote, "A Brahmin must be fixed up in understanding of Brahman. One should not take it cheaply. This initiation is very serious, and one should endeavor to follow the orders of the spiritual master with great determination," unquote. Firm faith is lost when the disciple falls from that platform. This is almost always due to the result of bad association, particularly when that association is a deviated authority figure in the cult, one making demands upon the genuine Brahmin who is subordinate to him in the hierarchy. The Brahmin cannot remain fixed in such an arrangement, as the headwinds are far too strong. This situation is exacerbated when a Sahajiya has power in the cult over all the Brahmins, who are forced to accept him as a liberated Acharya. No one can become or remain Madhyam Udhikari when he is under the thumb of a bogus guru. The fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation became a Sahajiya cult in the spring of 1978, although it was already leaning in that direction previously. Indeed, one of its pretenders converted his fairyland in West Virginia into a Sahajiya cult in late 1977. His influence prevailed at the GBC conclave 3 months later in West Bengal, and the whole institution was then converted into a perverted facsimile. It has remained a Sahajiya cult from that time. All of its gurus for the last 42 years, without exception, have been and continue to be bogus gurus. None of them can channel a bona fide spiritual kum and devotional initiation to anyone, even to one who enters that society with the initial intention of becoming a pure devotee. In the association of so-called ISKCON, that is impossible. Its gurus are anything but honest and pure, and the initiations they transmit are useless for the purpose of vimukti. Those institutional gurus are not real Brahmins, primarily because none of them are honest men. A Brahmin must possess the quality of arjavam, honesty. This is stated clearly in the final chapter of Bhagavad Gita, wherein Lord Krishna describes the qualities of a Brahmin. The fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation is shot through with prevarication and deception at every level, and this certainly includes its gurus and their initiations. So-called ISKCON is a broken arrow, a Sahajiya Sampradaya, which in Sanskrit is also known as an Upa Sampradaya. The vitiated governing body commission is its power node, and this entity represents the cynosure of institutional dishonesty. The Machiavellian board empowers its party men to be initiating gurus via the no objection certificate, and that concoction increases evil throughout the world. All ISKCON gurus, both past and present, need to be thoroughly rejected. They need to be rejected along with their initiations, which require to be exorcised from the unfortunates who are misguided by those gurus and thus imbibed pseudo-bhakti seeds. Tattvamasi. Now let us proceed to the second division of this month's presentation. The following is an excerpt from a platform lecture given by Prabhupada on January 2nd, 1967 in New York City. Quote, Lord Chaitanya says this Shakha Chandra logic, just like the branch of a tree is far away from the moon. Still, one can see it by perspective view through the branches of the tree, unquote. The argument can be made, and it has been made, that the ISKCON contamination, which infiltrated into the movement in the late 70s, that it was overcome by the end of 1987. The fact is that it was not at all transcended. And this is not particularly difficult to understand. of course, it is impossible to understand for those under the influence of the ISKCON bias, but our videos and treatises are not meant for them. They're meant for you. It is a long history, herein encapsulated. The 11 pretender Mahabhagavats, great pretenders, all GBC men, parlayed their appointment as Ritviks in the summer of 1977 into an alleged appointment by Prabhupada as post ipso facto initiating spiritual masters, Diksha Gurus. They did so with the help of the following 4 factors. 1. By the sanction from Swami B.R. Sridhar of Navadvip. 2. By their own machinations within the governing body commission. 3. By deceptively claiming that Prabhupada appointed them and that there was a Prabhupada appointment tape verifying this lie. And 4. By the general ignorance of rank-and-file devotees throughout the world at that time. This coup d'état was successful. There had to first be GBC votes, however, before it could be imposed. Approval to visit and imbibe direction from Swami B.R. Sridhar, including his conception of the zonal acharya, his advice that they adopt a scheme of becoming de facto kings in zones. This passed the GBC by a vote of 22-1. Somewhat ironically, it was one of the 11 who was the only GBC member to vote against that resolution. The society was fully converted to its perverted facsimile during this first transformation, the zonal acharya imposition. Has this late 70s negative impact actually been transcended? In order to answer that question, let us consider a basic formula most of us learned in sophomore year of high school during algebra class. Interestingly enough, the symbol used now for equivalence has an equal sign in it. Back in the day, it was one tilde over another. Today's new math symbol is more accurate because equivalence also contains a strong element of equality. The formula is, if A is equivalent to B, and B is equivalent to C, and C is equivalent to D, then A is equivalent to D. Basic algebra, basic logic. The major premise is that so-called ISKCON deviated from the parampara even before the first transformation. The minor premise is that the 3 subsequent deviations still had elements in them from that first deviation. The conclusion is that all 4 stages, A, B, C, and D, are equivalent. They are integral to each other. Letter A represents the final years of Prabhupada with us, in weak health but maintaining physical manifestation, barely active in his movement. In point of fact, he lost control of it in those final years. Important facts cannot remain hidden even when unpalatable. Theistic transcendentalists want to see things as they are. They want to see just how deep the rabbit hole goes. And it goes very deep in multiple tunnels within the ISKCON World Church. That particular rabbit hole in a nascent stage began developing while Prabhupada was still physically manifest. Those who join it now ingest the blue pill that the organized religion has been dishing out ever since the rabbit hole formed, and those unfortunates cannot see any of these facts which we are giving to all of you today. So that was letter A. The letter B represents the first transformation, the letter C represents the second transformation, and the letter D represents the current one, the third transformation, the Hinduization of the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation. Superficially, these transformations were and are different. One of them was abrupt, and the other three were gradual and quite insidious. One of them was in competition with another momentum, the outcome unclear as to which one would prevail. The bad one prevailed. The others were complete unto themselves and for all practical purposes accepted by everyone. In the ISKCON movement, they were basically unopposed. Two were and are acknowledged, and two were and are not. The current transformation, the Hinduization of so-called ISKCON, is neither recognized nor acknowledged by that movement, but it is obvious to everybody else. Three of them emphasized a form of institutionalism, but the other one emphasized pretender Mahabhagavats. Such comparisons can go on and on. However, they all have basics in common. That's the equivalence. All have some of the same men in power positions, defenders of the faiths, and in most cases, so-called gurus. All have the approval of the vitiated GBC. All were mindsets imposed upon the rank and file. As such, they all have a running equivalency. In other words, they are all approximately equal, a continuous equality. Thus, we apply the algebraic analogy in order to see the same deviation within each of these transformations, understanding that all of them are connected, and this connection is integral to all of them. The ISKCON train of events remains linked, and here's how it can be summed up. Prabhupada said, quote, regular guru, that's all, unquote. A regular guru is still under vidhi bhakti regulation. Did the imposition of the pretender Mahabhagavats and their extravagant worship resemble anything like a regular guru? And let us be reminded, the pretension was imposed by force, physical, verbal, and astral. In an entry dated April 2019 on his Facebook page, Tanu Madhya remembered the following incident when he protested the zonal scam at Bhaktivedanta Manor in early 1978, just after it was implemented. Quote, I was the only one who questioned the declaration of these demons when they announced to the assembled disciples of Srila Prabhupada that they had become acharyas. He, and Tanu Madhya is referring to his bhakti leader at that time, he said that Srila Prabhupada had recognized these 11 as his eternal associates and had appointed them as the new acharyas of ISKCON. I was acutely aware of the fact that none of these 11 were qualified, so I asked him, what if one of them falls down? He immediately started screaming that I was an offender and I had no faith in Srila Prabhupada, unquote. Besides imposing it by physical, verbal, and astral force, the 11 also made themselves untouchable. One of them, Harikesh Prabhu, who has, to his great credit, repudiated the whole thing and deeply regrets his implication in it, was in the room, obviously, during that infamous GBC meeting in the spring of 1978. Yes, this is the same man who is the only vote against consulting Swami B.R. Sridhar, which we mentioned previously in this month's presentation. In Harikesh's recent publication entitled Myths About Hari, So-Called Facts and the Skinny of It All, Prabhupada's personal secretary in 1976 relates the following about the creation of the Acharya Board. Quote, now the GBC was divided, and within it was the Acharya Board that met to discuss what to do about this situation and how to avoid civil war. For reasons I cannot understand, Satsvarup Maharaj, who at that time was looked upon as being learned, wrote a paper that was presented to the society. Again, I was the only one against that paper. I said it was simplistic and did not address the needs of God Brothers and other GBC. I was not heard. He, meaning Satsvarup, he presented the paper and was hammered with questions, none of which he could answer to the satisfaction of those who were angered by the paper. So the root of the entire problem in dealing with Prabhupada's untimely demise was this idiotic idea to go to a person who was famous within Gaudiya Math for being a breaker of form and a destroyer of mutts. And in one short meeting, he set the scene for ruination of peace in ISKCON by dividing the house against itself, placing young men in an elitist position far beyond the control of any other organization, and destroying the organization's capacity to correct the situation later on, unquote. In a letter to his first disciple who danced at Tompkins Square Park in the mid-60s, dated June 1970, Prabhupada used the analogy of a razor. Quote, "We should always be careful about our responsibilities. It is said in the scriptures that spiritual life is just like handling a sharpened razor. If we handle it nicely, we become cleanly shaved. But a little inattention causes blood stain," unquote. Well, it turned out to be more than a mere blood stain, didn't it? Some opine that what went down in the late 70s amounted to a bloodless coup. Of course, there were some murders and assassinations, but on the whole, the devotees at that time, the rank and file, were bamboozled by it. Worse than that, almost all of them bought into the scheme and then pushed it. Your host speaker did not. And those big-time deviants and their enablers were able to pull it off easily, at least in the beginning. The ramifications and repercussions of that major deviation are legion. Over 2 millennia ago, Aristotle concisely summed up the situation we are now facing. Quote, "The least deviation from the truth is multiplied later 1,000-fold," unquote. Now, of course, there was some advance warning. Prabhupada's branch of Lord Chaitanya's movement was supposed to be an ashrama. Ashrama means shelter. And that means shelter from the all-consuming fire of Western militia culture, loaded as it was and as it is with constant envy, unrelenting competition, and mutual contempt, what Hobbes called, quote-unquote, the all against the all. In the beginning years, Prabhupada's society was an ashram. But as time wore on, even while he was still physically manifest, that shelter broke down and dissipated. The plainclothes pick was a big part of that, as it converted those who fully engaged in it into gold-plated grifters. Envy amongst and between the big guns trickled down line to their followers. And if those followers were pickers, however, they were put on an illusory pedestal within their sphere of stratification, wherein their competitive juices could also marry their contempt of those who they beat out. Unrelenting competition caught fire and was rationalized in many ways. 2 of these stand out. One is the no utopia argument. Since even in the spiritual world, Prabhupada said there is no utopia, well, why should we not anticipate here that there will be all kinds of deception, envy, competition, and contempt? After all, what did you expect? Utopia, Mr. Anderson? It was also rationalized in another way. Smoke always covering the fire. In this case of a mixed metaphor, the idea is that perfect dealings, including honest dealings free from envy, competition, and contempt, cannot really be part of the package in the movement. There is no perfect fire, so don't expect it. It cannot exist because there is always smoke covering it. We can pretend to be honest and free from envy and competition, and that pretension would certainly be approved by Machiavelli. But actual freedom from the fire of material life is not possible and should not be expected. Of course, what is lost once these two rationalizations are accepted is a movement offering a real ashram from the pandemonium of Western so-called civilization and culture. Such has been the case since late 1973 in Prabhupada's attempt to establish a house that everyone could live in. There are those of us, however, perhaps the few, who will not make this compromise. We want shelter from all of that, and we left all of it for the purpose of transcendence. We want to transcend all of that, and it is a slippery slope once the validity of ashram is thrown into the dumpster fire. The fact is, and the fact remains, that Prabhupada wanted his movement to be an ashram. However, even before he left us, his chosen leaders were ignoring him. After all, there was a lot more in it for them at the top of the turtle tank. If envy, competition, and contempt became all-pervasive, which it did, effectively clogging the minds of the hoi polloi and degrading the rank and file into the mode of passion. Those rascal leaders did not listen to him when he said regular guru. They did not recognize the fact that they were only appointed as Ritviks. Since they did not hear him, they could not follow him. We are thus left with the burnt remnants of an Upasampradaya which offers no true ashram or shelter. Let us now proceed to the third division of this month's presentation. During an early platform lecture on July 22, 1966 in New York City, Prabhupada commented upon perspective. Quote, "Just like on the 2nd Avenue, due to the constant traffic of motor car, there is always a creation of dusting over everything. Similarly, by our manipulation of materialistic activities, there are some material dusts which are accumulated on the mind, and therefore we are unable to see things in true perspective," unquote. Now the argument will be made that there are so many post-Prabhupada devotees in today's so-called ISKCON who are dedicated members of the cult and pushing their brand of Krishna consciousness. Indeed, they practically populate the whole thing, as could only be expected. They engage in deity worship. They engage in preaching. Their particular kind of preaching, of course. They live seemingly austere lives. At any rate, now you want to claim that all of these people were never initiated? It will destroy them if they were to ever even entertain that idea. Prabhupada would never want that. This mentality, which is nothing more than a rationalization used as a defense mechanism, is indicative of myopic perspective. It is also indicative of a careless and overconfident attitude relative to what has gone down over the decades, via 3 distinct and unauthorized transformations or changes. So-called ISKCON appears to be a branch of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, but in point of fact it is no such thing. The reality is that it is nothing more than a temporary blip of a Western Upasampradaya on time's radar screen. Consider, if you will, the following excerpt from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, text 17, which assists our gaining true perspective. Quote, 4 yugas, rotating 1,000 times, comprise 1 day of Brahma, and the same number comprise 1 night of Brahma. Brahma lives 100 such years and then dies. These 100 years, by Earth calculations, total to 311 trillion and 40 billion Earth years. By these calculations, the life of Brahma seems fantastic and interminable, but from the viewpoint of eternity, it is as brief as a lightning flash. In the causal ocean, there are innumerable Brahmas rising and disappearing like bubbles in the Atlantic. Brahma and his creation are all part of the material universe, and therefore they are in constant flux, unquote. During a platform lecture on January 15th, 1967 in New York City, Prabhupada confirmed the Vedic maxim that a disciple of a bona fide guru sees everything in the right light, in the right perspective. That maxim from the Chandogya Upanishad is Acharyavan Purusho Veda. Acharyavan Purusho Veda. Prabhupada describes it, quote, if you are actually in Krishna consciousness, there is full light, full light. Everything will be seen in its pure perspective. Krishna consciousness means to know everything as it is. Nothing will be falsely represented to a person who is in Krishna consciousness. He knows everything, unquote. Quote, trying to advance in spiritual life outside the disciplic succession is simply ludicrous. It is said, therefore, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, one who follows the disciplic succession of acharyas knows things as they are, unquote. Krishna consciousness means to see as the Supersoul sees. The Supersoul is the Paramatma within the heart. To see as the Supersoul sees means to be fixed in spiritual intelligence. It entails the right perspective. To see as Paramatma sees is important. It's essential. But this vision cannot even be approached if you remain mired in the syrupy cult sentiment that is integral to myopic perspective. The many unfortunates entangled in the black hole, known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, are not pure devotees, nor are they on the path of pure devotion, real bhakti. They may have been sincere when they first approached that institution and its beautiful show bottle deities, but they were not sincere enough. They may have been serious about transcendence at that time, but not serious enough. Otherwise, they would not have accepted a bogus initiation from a bogus guru representing that Upasampradaya, one which only appears superficially to be the real thing. However, this cannot be realized while the neophyte or the mixed devotee or the budding sahajya is ensconced by limited perspective. You require the right perspective to see things as they are, as verified by Prabhupada in this excerpt from a letter to one of his first disciples dated June 3rd, 1969, quote, in comparison to all these dogmatic principles, our Krishna consciousness movement presents everything in the right perspective, even from scientific and philosophical point of view, unquote. All covering rationalizations serve to create myopic perspective, which is easily exploited by experienced cult leaders. Nor will a decadent lifestyle facilitate the right perspective. The current nihilism and hedonism is not conducive to seeing things as they are. you need to attain a much higher vision, combined with a long-term outlook, one which transcends all of the nescience that has gone down within the ISKCON World Church. Spiritual science is special, and it automatically produces a philosophy which is one. The philosophy connected to the absolute truth, integral to the absolute truth. The absolute truth inculcates a vision that transcends limited perspectives. The Brahmin is an honest man of knowledge and realization. His theism is real, and he is able to convey it to those who actually listen to him and hear from him. He does so by inculcating within them the power of proper, true perspective. The Krishna consciousness movement is meant for this. Not for a cult perspective, wherein we're supposed to feel some kind of outrage and guilt when the truth is stated, that none of the newcomers ever got real initiation from either their wild card or from their institutional guru of choice. Dated November 3rd, 1970, here's another excerpt from a letter to one Dr. Chakravarti, in which Prabhupada affirms the importance of marrying spiritual science and bhakti philosophy with proper perspective. Quote, "Your tendency to present Bengali Gaudiya Vaishnavism in its proper perspective is very much welcome. We are trying to present Krishna consciousness all over the world in a very scientific and philosophical way, and as such, your help in this connection will be of great value," unquote. ISKCON, unfortunates, cannot help anyone achieve divine vision. We can extend some pity to them, but we cannot be overwhelmed by their situation. They all deserved what they got and what they didn't get. Reality bites, and it is the duty of the Brahmin to elucidate that in order to impress upon the brain and the heart of those who hear from him the right perspective in Krishna consciousness. The society of the cheaters and the cheated has to be exposed, and then it has to be checked. The truth of the current situation, and it's a terrible situation, must be confronted by you. The proper function of psychological activity of real intelligence is to understand everything through the Supreme Lord's perspective. He has a point of view, and it is our duty to share it with him. Even though it can be said that his devotee knows things as they are because he follows Guru, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, the philosophical process of knowledge and realization never stops. No one in any Appa Sampradaya is truly initiated. Time and space ultimately has nothing to do with it. You have been given the correct answer to the key question here in its true perspective, as opposed to faulty answers produced by short-term or intermediate perspectives, which are only illusions. Through this long-term perspective only can you remain unaffected by all of the rationalizations pushed by the ISKCON World Church. The true perspective is that everything is functioning now in the name of Prabhupada's original society. It's still connected in the fabricated so-called ISKCON to the original deviation of 1978. That's the true perspective. The fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation effectively ruined his movement over 40 years ago. It is your duty to expose the current iteration and check its momentum, at least to help to check its momentum. We cannot allow it to get into the saddle of the coming New World Order because if it does, it will ride mankind ruthlessly via unspeakable atrocities for a very long time. Sadeva Samya.